I guess in a way, I've been putting this together since I was a tiny little girl, having to go to church many days a week and being part of the festivities at Christmas. That's how it started. And then as I got a little older, I started researching what other cultures would do at this time of the year. I was talking to Doug Morris in the States a few months ago. It must have been March. I've known him since the mid-'80s, and he has really been sort of a musical father for me. And he said, I've always wanted to know what you would do with a seasonal record. And he said, I'm telling you, I have hundreds of records that are here. Look around you. I have hundreds of them, of people doing carols exactly like they should be done. I have commercial Christmas records of people doing popular songs that we all have grown up with as well. And he said, I want you to do something different. I want you to go be Tori. And that's what I want to hear. And my brain is clicking as I'm sitting there. And he said, I want to hear the carols like I've never heard them before, but get me all the good bits.
What child is this who lay to rest on Mary?
I had to really think very quickly and pull on a training that I had for many years of variations on the theme. People get very, I think, sedentary when they think about the word Christmas music. They don't think about anything except what they know. They don't think of all the possibilities. And if you haven't been exposed, then you kind of think, oh, it's pretty much the same thing. I know this, and I know the music, and there's nothing new here. I remember somebody making a comment that had come from England that said, well, this isn't away in a manger. And I kind of thought they were nuts, saying, no, this really is away in a manger. And they said, no, this isn't the right song. And then I began to learn that a lot of hymns from England are very different than the ones in America. But it became something that I wanted to join together. I started to immerse myself with the New Oxford Book of Carols, which is a book that came out of England, and it's really so informative about trying to be honest where the music came from. And some of the music is so ancient that they can't even tell you where it comes from. They will tell you that they know that there is a record of it when the church got a hold of it, or when a choir would get a hold of it. But there was a tradition in England of the folk song, and yet the folk song was taken from wassail songs. So, or drinking, drinking songs. And that starts to make a lot of sense, because you think, well, the Anglican Church was around for, since the middle of the 1500s or something like that. They had no music unless they took the Catholics' music, and they weren't going to do that. So they took pagan songs, drinking songs, sea shanties, and they would change the words and put their ideology into it. When you think about it, I'm just doing what they did. So I'm really part of this wonderful tradition of bringing forth a point of view of the time that the song is being sung. I would say to you that my point of view is probably much, much closer to the original than what the Methodists probably did with it. And, you know, I have a good giggle with staunch Methodists because I understand them very well. They teetotal. I can give them grape juice. I respect all that. I've lived with it. I understand it. And yet what I think they would be fascinated to know is that a lot of this music is very ancient, and there is a marriage that needed to happen, I think, with the idea of rebirth. And the season was really about the rebirth of light. And of course, for the Christians, that's Christ is the poetic representation of that. So unless you had people meddling like me, then you wouldn't have the music you have today. But Doug and I had this conversation that was very direct, and he said to me, if you're going to do this, will you just Tori, will you get rid of all this King of Israel business? Because I'm Jewish, and I really love these songs, but this whole religious thing is making me nuts. And so I started to think, well, then there's my mom, who is a minister's wife, and the whole King of Israel business is the center of her life. So you're kind of going, Mom, Doug, Mom, Doug, Mom, Doug, and then there's Dad being a minister. And the funny thing about him is, he's an enigma. He'll say, Tori Ellen, what child is this? They stole that from Greensleeves. I said, yes, that's right. That's another melody. And the word stole, in those times, it wasn't really thought of as stealing. And in England, I've learned the song, the carol, What Child Is This, is not really sung there anymore, because that's sort of like singing, a song about Jesus to Billie Jean by Michael Jackson, and it's just too strange.
Can do, are the children safe now? Unlike
In some ways, there's nothing shocking about the work, other than I'm bringing together the idea of the rebirth of light, not just one religious ideology, but something much, much grander than that. There are a few themes running through it. Winter is represented by the Holly King, summer, the Summer Queen, which is a very ancient idea. And that is a narrative running through the record. It keeps reoccurring, where you have the Holly King and the Summer Queen, the idea of the seasons joining, fire and frost in marriage. And then out of that, of course, is going to be a birth. And I have kind of, yes, acknowledged the birth of Christ as one tradition, but then there's the birth of light, of ideas, of the sun itself, S-U-N, solar, and also the birth of the feminine, which is part of this as well. This music is coming after women are finally reclaiming the feminine, that aspect. Not being a feminist. Jesus was the first Christian feminist, but I'm talking about the feminine, the Great Mother, which was not embraced, and she had to be made a virgin to even be respected. So all of the other cultures embraced the sacred act that created life. And I can embrace the idea of holding sacred a virgin concept for a woman, but I also can hold sacred the act of fire and frost joining and creating life. And so that was very important, that in my story of the rebirth of light, that there's no shame in that rebirthing, and that the male aspect as well as the feminine aspect is honored. There are influences from America and England. I would say that growing up, there were certain ones that were very popular there. And one of them I've joined with another carol. And they both have English passports, if you will. So we talked about the American carol, which I think was originally, the lyric was penned by a British guy, but the music being Greensleeves. The record starts with What Child Noel. And then it's joined with something that I've composed and goes into Noel. And Noel, I was always told, was French, because the spelling is the French spelling. And there are many Noels. There's a tradition of Noels coming from France, which I didn't understand. And I didn't know that there were many different ones. Well, the one that we know in the States, and that's very famous, is from Cornwall. And that's Nowell. That's Noel. And whether they were saying Noel, because they came out of a drinking binge and needed water, nobody's quite sure when you're talking to the experts. When I started to learn that a lot of the carols I had been drawn to originated in the West Country, I kind of thought to myself, well, who knew? All this time, I didn't know that, but what is important here is that the Methodist influence. I didn't realize that Cornwall was really saturated by Methodist at a certain point. And when they came in, what we all have to understand about the Methodists is that they didn't have a song culture. Imagine you're coming in, they're breaking away from other denominations at the time, John Wesley, his brother Charles Wesley. And if you're thinking for a minute, okay, you're Charles Wesley, the brother who's got to come up with this music, and as good as he may be, you've got to come up with a lot of music really quick. So what do? So you start pulling on other traditions of music, and then you change the lyric to fit your ideology of whatever that is. There is an English folk rock tradition that I think harkens back to your ancient mythology. You pull that in, and Zeppelin always has a bit of that. So yes, I think with Star of Wonder, you have that. If you're going to bring in the ancient Arabic with the wise men, it seemed like there had to be a take on it that I think included some of the voicings that they would use in the arrangement, but also I've been influenced by maybe the last 50 years of the folk rock tradition, which you don't really have anywhere else. Not quite like here. I called in my old buddy, John Philip Chanel, who's done strings on most of my records since Little Earthquakes. So he worked on that record, but he began doing the string arrangements on Under the Pink, this being my 11th album. He's worked on all 11, but he's done strings for 10. And when I called him in, he understood immediately what I was up to because he's part Russian, and he comes from the understanding of variations on the theme. We decided to push things to a place that encompassed hundreds of years of music. So Candle Coventry Carol goes back to a medieval place. We pulled in brass for that as well as lute. And for Emmanuel, that's older. That's one of the oldest pieces of music that we know of. Soon after the Catholic Church was formed, that came out of the Dark Ages. So I was working with that, trying to go back to the ancient texts and imagining sometimes what might have been there, as well as the point of this record is not to try and give you the point of view of the music of the early 18th century. There are people that do that, and that is not at all what I'm interested in doing. This is the 21st century, and in 200 years' time, that's what I'm looking at. This record might have come and gone and nobody heard it, but in 200 years, they will know exactly what I did. There is the carol portion, but then there's the original compositions that were influenced by some of my favorite compositions from the 20th century that aren't really created anymore. I think that kind of music, big band, Witch, Pink and Glitter, really contains. We recorded that in New York City with some of the great players that are there. And we recorded the strings in Los Angeles with an orchestra there. And I really feel as if we were trying to pull in this wonderful part of our seasonal tradition, that the carols being one, and then good old Frank. I would also say there are others that, Ella Fitzgerald, there's so many people that would do versions. And there are a few songs on the record that are in this spirit.
Oh, come, Emmanuel.
In the artwork, we have the four elements represented: air, water, earth, fire. And it was important, I think, that we bring back this creation story, and creation coming from elements, something very, I don't know, I find it beyond religions, or it's inclusive and yet exclusive as well, the paradox, because in so many of the religions of the last, I don't know, couple hundred years, they've, how do you say it, amputated the idea of the sacred marriage. And so you have all these women giving birth all over the world, and yet it's not sacred because they weren't virgins. And in the pagan idea, and not just pagan, but in the belief systems of our ancient people, it was very sacred, the birth of a child. And all children are sacred. And I think that's really part of what the record is including as well. My father has been the most encouraging person when it comes to this record, Midwinter Graces. He is sending me messages every day And he's encouraging me. He encouraged me. He said, daughter, don't write this for Dad. I want you to write this from your place of where you are as a woman and a mother, and your career has been about empowering not just women, but all people for their wholeness and not being subjugated to a belief system. And he has been the most, I don't know, encouraging of all people when it comes to the religious theme and trying to liberate his own way of thinking. So that's been very exciting. And then of course Doug Morris has been very supportive, but they're the two polar opposites. One, the minister, who would be very hurt if I didn't respect that there is a deep Christian tradition. But then Doug would be really bummed if I didn't respect that there are other traditions as well.
Lo, how a rose shall bloom.
The thing about doing a seasonal album, which you have tremendous possibility. I think, you have a focused but wide palette. Because if you're going to cover hundreds of years of tradition, then when you are in something like Emmanuel or Candle Coventry Carol, you cannot be, your watercolors can't be running over from Star of Wonder, which has that folk rock Persian element. And, Persians in leather in my mind. I'd say if you go back to the 30s and the 40s, there's some incredible compositions from there that we still sing today and have become a part of our culture. But the industry doesn't necessarily, support, or radio support some of these kind of classic compositions being written today. And so you have to transcend what popular culture is in the 21st century and not be held hostage to that, and then go make a work that might not get played by anybody as far as commercial radio, but that couldn't be my focus or concern. It had to be about making a record that is influenced by my classical training, and also with a nod to the great big band era. When you ask me about favorite tracks on the record, well, I've really tried to give 1,000% to each one, and I know that sounds as if I'm not making a choice, but when you're producing something with your team, you have to be fair with each track. And if you pick a favorite, if you have a class pet, then you can't give each one your attention fully and completely when they're upon you. So I've really tried to be objective and immerse myself completely in the song we're doing. I've had fun with certain ones. I had a great time with the big band. I just had a great time. So Pink and Glitter, of my compositions, I enjoyed. And there's a song from The Light Princess, which is the musical I've been working on with Samuel Adamson, the playwright. And that song is Winter's Carol. That comes from The Light Princess, so that's the first thing that anybody's hearing from the musical. Is this me making peace with Christianity? Well, I don't think I'm at war with Christianity. This wasn't, I wasn't doing the Shock the Christians record. I mean, that is one of my favorite pastimes. But this is not what this is, because I really wanted, and I handle my heart, my mom, to love this as much as Doug will love this. But there are people involved in the project who have deep Christian roots. They might be more personal and not so overt, but they really find the music magical and the message magical, and they're not offended at all. So my gauge so far has been that people that haven't been brought up in the Christian nativity story are open to the record and can embrace it without feeling like they're trying to get converted. And then people that are very clear about their religious beliefs are able to embrace the record and hear what they want to hear. And that was really my goal. My goal was to not alienate, but my goal was to say, you know, I have walked on both sides, and both sides being a very deeply religious home that takes it very, very seriously. And I've also lived and worked with people that are more, that come from the intellectual place and see Christianity more as a mythology and ideology, no different than any other kind of faith system. And then I've spent time with people who haven't really been brought up in a religious household or a faith system. And if they have, it isn't Christian. And they're able to embrace this. And I wanted both of these very different perceptions to be able to come together and listen to music that really is inclusive. I'm a big Jesus fan, but I don't necessarily think Jesus would be supporting some of the teachings that have been used against people. I mean, talk about a progressive. He really was a progressive. But of course, Jesus' message got assimilated by the powers of Rome, and they decided, well, if we edit Jesus here and we edit Jesus there, and we kind of cut him here and cut him there and make him like that, then we can rule as the authority. And this whole idea of mankind and womankind being emancipated from an authority, oh no, they're going to answer to an authority. Well, that was not Jesus's idea. His father was the divine creator of compassion and love, not war and judgment and shame. And the Catholic Church is, the core has been about shame and subjugation. And in 200 years, they're going to have this, hopefully, this merging of the sacred feminine that is and has been healing itself for over 2,000 years, because the feminine was subjugated by the patriarchal authority. And really, you know, who we are as women, as mothers, was amputated. And so to heal that is really important for us to move forward. And to have the idea of rebirth, rebirth of light and of light. And so I don't think I'm at war with portions of the Christian story, but I'm a firm believer that you have to be really honest about history. And there's something incredibly liberating in that.
Joy to